The chapel bell had not rung in warning for 11 years, not since the Apache raids drove the first sisters from their original mission house. But it was ringing now, wild and frantic, and Eva Dalton was already moving before the third strike fell silent. 6 riders had come down from the ridge road at a dead gallop, kicking up red dust that hung in the air like a curtain of blood, and their leader, a lean man with a silver scar splitting his eyebrow, was shouting a name across the courtyard of the Convent of the Sacred Heart that made every sister freeze where she stood. "Bailey, Luke Bailey, we know you are hiding behind these walls, you yellow dog. Send him out, or we burn this whole rat's nest to the ground, nuns and all." Eva did not freeze. She had spent 17 years learning not to freeze, and the habit she wore over her shoulders did nothing to erase the years before it, the years when her father had pressed a Winchester rifle into her hands and told her that fear was only useful if you let it slow you down. She was in the tool shed before Mother Agnes had even reached the courtyard door, her fingers finding the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards where she had, against every rule of her postulancy, kept a rifle oiled and loaded since the day she arrived. Outside, Luke Bailey stood in the open dirt yard with his hands raised, his broad shoulders squared beneath a plain cottonwork shirt, his jaw set like a man walking to his own hanging. He had spent 4 months disguised as nothing more than a quiet groundskeeper, chopping wood, mending fences, keeping his eyes down and his history buried, and now it had found him anyway, the way dark pasts always did. "You have the wrong man," Luke said, his voice low, and even though Eva, watching from the shadow of the shed, could hear the tremor beneath it, the sound of a man calculating how many of the sisters he could save if he simply let himself be taken. "I never forget a face, Bailey," the scarred rider called back. His name was Silas Crane, and Eva would learn it soon enough, would learn to hate the sound of it the way she hated the sound of thunder before a flash flood. "Not after what you did to my brother. You are going to pay for that betrayal today, one way or another." Luke's hand did not move toward the gun belt he no longer wore. That was the choice he had made, the sacrifice at the center of everything, to bury the gunslinger and become a man who broke bread with sisters instead of breaking necks for outlaws. "Take me then," Luke said. "Leave the convent be. These women have done nothing to you." Crane laughed, a dry, ugly sound, and drew his pistol, and that was the moment Eva Dalton stepped out from behind the shed with a Winchester rifle already leveled against her shoulder, her novice's veil pushed back from her face, her gray eyes as steady as stone. "You will lower that weapon," she said, and her voice carried across the courtyard with an authority that made 3 of the riders actually flinch in their saddles, "or I will put a bullet through your gun hand before you can pull that trigger." For a long, suspended breath, nobody moved. Crane stared at the young woman in the black habit holding a rifle like she had been born gripping one, and something like disbelief crossed his scarred face. "A nun," he said, and spat into the dust. "You think a little bird like you scares me." Eva did not answer him with words. She answered him by firing a single shot that clipped the pistol clean out of his hand, sending it spinning into the dirt 10 feet away, the crack of the rifle shot echoing off the adobe walls of the convent like a bell of judgment. The silence afterward was absolute. Luke Bailey turned his head slowly to look at the woman who had just outdrawn and outshot a professional gunfighter without so much as blinking, and in that moment, something shifted behind his eyes, some deep foundation of the world he thought he understood cracking wide open. He had spent his whole life believing he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He had never once considered that the most dangerous person in this particular room had been kneeling beside him in chapel every morning, her hands folded in prayer, her secret buried as deep as his own. Crane's men scattered as more shots rang out, not from Eva alone now but from the ridge above the convent, where 2 more sisters, it turned out, had rifles of their own, though none could match the precision Eva had just demonstrated. Within minutes the outlaws were retreating in a cloud of dust and curses, promising to return, promising this was not finished, and Luke Bailey was left standing in the courtyard staring at Eva Dalton as though he had never truly seen her before. "You had a rifle hidden this whole time," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "In a convent." "You had a gunslinger's past hidden this whole time," Eva replied, lowering the Winchester but not releasing it. "In a convent. I suppose we are neither of us quite what we appear, Mr. Bailey." It was the first time she had said his full name aloud, and hearing it in her voice, calm and unafraid and edged with something that might have been admiration, Luke Bailey felt the careful walls he had built around his heart begin, for the first time in years, to crumble. 4 months earlier, before any of that, before the bell had ever rung in warning, Luke Bailey had arrived at the Convent of the Sacred Heart half dead, his shirt soaked through with blood, his horse stumbling beneath him from exhaustion and thirst. The Arizona Territory sun was merciless that afternoon in early spring, and Eva had been out past the convent's garden walls checking the rabbit snares she set most mornings to supplement the sisters' meager stores, a task Mother Agnes tolerated only because Eva's success at it kept the whole convent fed through lean seasons. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, a labored, uneven gait that spoke of an animal pushed far past its limits. When Luke slid from the saddle and collapsed into the dust at her feet, Eva did not scream or run for help first. She knelt beside him, pressed 2 fingers to his throat to check his pulse the way her father had taught her, and assessed the gunshot wound in his side with the clear, unflinching eyes of someone who had tended injuries before. "You have lost a great deal of blood," she said aloud to his unconscious form, "and if I leave you here to fetch the sisters, you may lose the rest of it before I return." She dragged him, with considerable effort and a strength that surprised even herself, into the shade of a mesquite tree, tore strips from her own petticoat to pack the wound, and then ran the 1/4 mile back to the convent faster than she had run in years, her habit hitched up around her knees in a manner Mother Agnes would certainly have found scandalous had anyone been present to witness it. Mother Agnes, a broad, weathered woman who had buried 2 husbands and outlived 3 bishops before finding her calling, took one look at the wounded stranger Eva, and 2 of the younger sisters carried in on a door frame, and made a decision that would alter the course of every life within those adobe walls. "We will not turn away a dying man," she said. "Whatever sins brought him to our door, God will sort out the rest of it in His own time." For 3 days, Luke hovered between life and death in a small room off the infirmary, and it was Eva, more than any other sister, who sat with him through the fever, changing his bandages, spooning broth between his cracked lips, listening to him mutter fragments of a past he had not yet chosen to reveal. "I did not want to," he said once, deep in delirium, his hand gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "I did not want to kill them. The children were watching." Eva did not know then what he meant, but she filed the words away carefully, the way she filed away every piece of information that might prove useful, a habit her father had drilled into her since childhood. "Trust nothing you have not verified," he used to say, "not even your own eyes in poor light." When Luke finally woke clear-headed on the 4th morning, he found himself staring up into the calm gray eyes of a young woman in a black habit, and his first instinct, honed by years of living outside the law, was to reach for a gun that was no longer at his hip. "It is in the cabinet," Eva said, before he could even ask, "along with your gun belt and the rest of your belongings." Mother Agnes thought it wise to remove temptation from a man recovering from a bullet wound, in case fever made you forget where you were. "Where am I?" "The Convent of the Sacred Heart, 3 miles outside the town of Redemption Creek. You arrived on our doorstep half dead 4 days ago, mister." She let the sentence hang, waiting, and Luke understood immediately that she was testing him, giving him the chance to lie or tell the truth, and something about her steady, patient gaze made lying feel suddenly much harder than it should have. "Bailey," he said finally. "Luke Bailey." "And what were you running from, Mr. Bailey, that put a bullet in your side and drove you to collapse at the gates of a house of God?" It was not an accusation, merely a question, delivered with the same clinical calm she might have used to ask about the weather, but Luke felt the weight of it pressing against his chest like a stone. "Men who wanted me dead for refusing to do something I could not live with," he said. "That is all I can tell you for now, sister. I would not want to bring danger to this place." "Too late for that concern, I think," Eva said, though not unkindly. "You already brought it here the moment you rode through our gates. The only question now is whether you intend to leave quietly once you are healed, or whether you intend to stay and become part of the danger you brought." Luke had no answer for her that morning, but the question lodged itself in him like a splinter, and over the following weeks, as his wound healed and his strength returned, he found himself increasingly unwilling to imagine riding away from the Convent of the Sacred Heart, and increasingly unable to stop watching the young novice named Eva Dalton with something far more complicated than gratitude. Mother Agnes, ever practical, offered Luke a bargain once he was strong enough to work. The convent needed a groundskeeper, someone to mend the fences the javelinas kept breaking, to repair the well pump, to chop wood for the coming winter, and in exchange he would have shelter, food, and a place to disappear from whatever past was hunting him, provided he kept his real name and his real history to himself. "The town of Redemption Creek does not need to know a wanted gunslinger sleeps in our tool shed," Mother Agnes told him bluntly. "You will be Luke, the drifter we hired for odd work, nothing more." Luke agreed readily, grateful beyond words for the reprieve, and threw himself into the physical labor with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his own memories through exhaustion. He mended every fence on the property within the first 2 weeks. He dug a new well when the old one ran low. He built a proper chicken coop to replace the leaning, half-collapsed structure that had housed the convent's hens for a decade. And every evening, after the work was done and the sisters had retired to their prayers, he found himself drawn to the small garden behind the infirmary, where more often than not, Eva Dalton would be found kneeling among the herbs, or occasionally, when she believed herself unobserved, practicing something else entirely. It was on one such evening, 3 weeks after he had first woken in the infirmary, that Luke discovered the truth about Eva Dalton that would eventually save both their lives. He had gone looking for her to ask about a tincture for a blister on his palm, following the garden path in the fading purple light of dusk, when he heard a sound that stopped him cold, a sound utterly out of place within convent walls, the sharp metallic click of a rifle bolt being worked with practiced efficiency. He crept closer, staying low behind the adobe wall that separated the garden from the small orchard beyond, and what he saw made him forget entirely about his blistered palm. Eva stood in a small clearing among the orange trees, her habit's outer layer removed and folded neatly on a stump, dressed only in her simple underdress, a rifle raised to her shoulder with the fluid, unconscious grace of someone who had held a weapon since childhood. She fired at a series of tin cans arranged along the orchard wall, and every single shot found its mark, the cans leaping and spinning in the dying light. Luke had spent years around gunfighters, had trained alongside some of the fastest hands in the territory, and he recognized instantly that what he was watching was not the fumbling practice of a novice, but the honed skill of an expert. She reloaded with a speed that impressed him further, her fingers moving without hesitation, without wasted motion, feeding cartridges into the rifle with the muscle memory of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. When she finished, she lowered the weapon, wiped her brow, and only then, turning, seemed to sense his presence. "How long have you been standing there, Mr. Bailey?" There was no embarrassment in her voice, no flustered attempt to explain or hide what he had witnessed, only a calm assessment of the situation, much like the way she had assessed his gunshot wound weeks before. "Long enough," Luke said, stepping out from behind the wall, "to see that a novice none shoots better than half the men I have ridden with, and I have ridden with some of the best guns in the territory." Eva's mouth curved into the faintest smile, the first genuine smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face, softening the sharp intelligence of her gray eyes into something warmer, more human. "My father was a United States Marshal before he died," she said. "Frank Dalton. Perhaps you have heard the name." Luke had in fact heard the name, spoken with respect around campfires throughout the territory, a lawman known for bringing in outlaws alive when he could, and for never missing a shot when he could not. "He is the one who taught me," Eva continued. "He had no sons, only me, and he refused to believe that meant I should not learn to protect myself. He taught me to shoot before I could properly read. He taught me to track, to read sign, to know which plants would heal and which would kill. He wanted to make sure that no man could ever take advantage of his daughter simply because she was born a woman in a world that undervalues women's strength." "What happened to him?" Something flickered across Eva's face, quick and painful, gone almost as fast as it appeared. "Outlaws killed him 3 years ago during a bank robbery in Prescott. He caught 4 men in the act. He brought down 3 of them before the 4th put a bullet through his heart from behind, a coward's shot. I came to the convent 6 months later, looking for peace I could not find anywhere else in this world." "And yet you still practice," Luke said gently. "Every evening, alone in the orchard, with a rifle you are not supposed to have." "The habit does not erase what I am, Mr. Bailey," Eva said, meeting his eyes directly. "I came here seeking God's peace, not seeking to forget my father's lessons. A woman who can protect herself and protect others does not become weaker for wearing a veil. If anything, I think it makes the protection more necessary, since the world assumes women in habits are helpless. An assumption is a dangerous thing to build safety upon." Luke found himself utterly unable to look away from her. This woman who had nursed him back from death's door with gentle hands, and now stood before him in the fading light with a rifle at her side, entirely unashamed of the contradiction she embodied. He had known dangerous men his whole adult life, had measured himself against gunfighters and outlaws and lawmen alike, but he had never in his life encountered anyone quite like Eva Dalton. "I am impressed," he admitted, the words feeling inadequate even as he said them. "Genuinely impressed. I do not impress easily. High praise from a man who was, if my instincts served me correctly, a hired gun himself before whatever happened that put a bullet in your side." Luke's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. There seemed little point, not with a woman who had already proven she could see through him as easily as through glass. "I rode with Silas Crane's outfit for near on 6 years," he said finally, the confession coming harder than he expected, though something about the honesty in her own admission made his own feel possible. "Started as protection work, guarding cattle drives, running off rustlers. Somewhere along the way it turned into something darker. Crane started taking jobs that had nothing to do with protecting honest folk and everything to do with driving homesteaders off land he wanted for himself. And the children you mentioned during your fever," Luke's face went pale beneath his sun-weathered skin. "You heard that." "I heard a great many things, Mr. Bailey, sitting beside your sickbed for 3 days and nights. You spoke of children watching, of not wanting to kill someone. I have been waiting for you to tell me the rest of it in your own time." Luke sat down heavily on the stump where Eva's outer habit lay folded, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his healing wound. "There was a family, the Whitfields, homesteading 40 acres near Redemption Creek that Crane wanted for a cattle route. He ordered me and 2 other men to burn them out, to make sure they understood the message was final if they did not leave by nightfall. There were 3 children, sister. The oldest could not have been more than 10 years old. I looked at those children's faces and I could not do it. I could not become the kind of man who burns families out of their homes for another man's profit. So what did you do?" "I told the other 2 men I would not go through with it, and when they tried to force the issue, I fought them. I killed one of them, wounded the other, and warned the Whitfield family to flee before Crane sent more men. Then Crane's brother found me 2 days later and put a bullet in my side for the betrayal. I killed him too, in the fight that followed, which is why Crane wants my head so badly now. I did not just refuse his orders. I killed his own blood in the doing of it." The full weight of the confession hung in the air between them, and Eva studied Luke's face for a long moment, searching, he supposed, for some sign of deception or self-justification, but finding none because there was none to find. He had told her the truth, the whole ugly, complicated truth, and he waited now to see what she would do with it. "You saved that family," Eva said finally, "at the cost of everything you had built for yourself, at the risk of your own life." "That does not sound like the confession of a villain to me, Mr. Bailey. That sounds like the confession of a man who found his conscience at the worst possible moment and paid dearly for it. Crane will not stop hunting me. He has money, connections throughout the territory. He will find me eventually, wherever I go, and when he does, anyone standing near me will be in danger too." "Then we shall simply have to make certain," Eva said, rising to her feet and lifting her rifle, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency, "that when he finds you, he discovers you are not as alone or as unprotected as he might assume." It was the first time either of them had spoken of a future together, however obliquely, and something about the way Eva said it, calm and certain, without a hint of fear, made Luke Bailey's heart do something it had not done in longer than he could remember. Over the following weeks, their evenings in the orchard became a ritual neither of them named aloud, but both of them protected fiercely, guarding the hour after supper when they would meet among the orange trees, ostensibly for Luke to help Eva clean and maintain her rifles, though the conversation always ranged far beyond gunsmithing. Luke learned that Eva had not yet taken her final vows, that she remained a novice still discerning whether the contemplative life truly suited her restless spirit, a fact that Mother Agnes knew and, remarkably, did not discourage her from questioning. "Mother Agnes says a calling forced is no calling at all," Eva explained one evening, oiling the rifle's action with careful, practiced movements. "She believes God's will reveals itself in time, and rushing it serves no one. I have been here 2 years now, and still I do not know if this life is truly mine, or if I came here simply to escape the grief of losing my father, and have stayed out of habit rather than conviction." "What would you do?" Luke asked, watching her hands work, mesmerized by the competence in every motion, "if you decided the contemplative life was not yours after all?" Eva considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I do not entirely know. Perhaps I would become a bounty hunter since I clearly have the skill for it. Perhaps a scout or a marshal, though the territory does not yet permit women to hold such positions officially, whatever their competence. Perhaps I would simply find a small piece of land somewhere and raise horses, and shoot rattlesnakes, and answer to no one but myself." "That sounds like a lonely life," Luke said quietly. "Lonelier than a convent, perhaps, but at least it would be honestly lonely, chosen with open eyes, rather than lonely while pretending to a certainty I do not entirely feel." She glanced up at him then, and something passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "What would you do, Mr. Bailey, if Crane's shadow were lifted from you tomorrow, if you woke to find yourself finally, truly free of your past?" Luke had not allowed himself to consider the question in years, had trained himself not to dream past the next sunrise, the next meal, the next narrow escape. But sitting there in the orchard with Eva Dalton's steady gray eyes upon him, he found the future suddenly, dangerously imaginable. "I would want a piece of land," he said slowly, working the thought out as he spoke it, "somewhere with good water and decent grass. I would want to raise horses, maybe some cattle. I would want—" He stopped himself, suddenly aware of how close the sentence had come to naming her directly. "You would want what?" Eva prompted, and there was something in her voice, some gentle insistence, that told him she already knew the answer and simply wanted to hear him say it. "I would want someone beside me who did not need protecting," Luke said finally, the words rough with honesty. "I have spent my whole life around people who needed something from me, protection or violence or both. I think I would want, for once, someone who chose to stand beside me not because she needed me, but because she wanted to." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It stretched between them like a bridge slowly being built, plank by careful plank, and neither of them rushed to cross it, though both understood, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, exactly where the bridge was leading. It was 3 days after that conversation that Silas Crane's men found the trail leading to the convent, and the peaceful rhythm Luke and Eva had built together shattered like glass beneath a boot heel. The first sign of trouble came from Tomas Reyes, a boy of perhaps 14 who ran errands for the convent in exchange for schooling from the sisters, who arrived at the gates one afternoon breathless and pale with news from town. "Strange men are asking questions at the saloon," Tomas reported to Mother Agnes, who summoned both Eva and Luke immediately upon hearing it. "6 of them, hard-looking men, asking if anyone has seen a tall man with dark hair and a scar on his jaw, matching the description of a drifter who might have taken work somewhere nearby. The sheriff would not tell them anything, but old Hank at the livery, he does not know to keep quiet, and he mentioned that the convent had hired a groundskeeper a few months back." Luke's face had gone gray as ash. "Crane, you must leave," Mother Agnes said, not unkindly but with the practical firmness that had guided the convent through worse crises. "Not because we wish to abandon you, Mr. Bailey, but because if these men come here and find you, they will burn this place to the ground with all of us inside it, and I cannot in good conscience allow that risk to fall upon my sisters." "She is right," Luke said, already moving toward the tool shed where his few belongings remained. "I never should have stayed this long. I put all of you in danger the moment I rode through those gates. Where will you go?" Eva asked, and there was something fierce in her voice that made Mother Agnes glance at her sharply. "Does not matter. Somewhere far from here, somewhere Crane's reach does not extend. Mexico, maybe, or up into the Dakota Territory." "That is running," Eva said, "not solving. Crane will simply hunt down anyone who might know where you went, starting with everyone in this convent. Do you truly believe leaving quietly will keep us safe, when he already suspects we have hidden you?" Luke stopped his packing, the truth of her words landing with the force of a physical blow. Of course Crane would not simply let the trail go cold. He would question everyone in Redemption Creek, would eventually learn that the convent's groundskeeper matched Luke's description too closely to be coincidence, and whether Luke fled or stayed, the sisters would face Crane's wrath regardless. "Then, what would you have me do?" he asked, frustration and fear warring in his voice. "I cannot fight Crane's entire gang alone, and I certainly cannot ask any of you to risk your lives further on my account." "You are not asking," Eva said. "I am offering. And you are not alone, Luke. You have not been alone since the day you collapsed at my feet, whether you have allowed yourself to admit that or not." Mother Agnes, who had watched this exchange with a complicated expression on her weathered face, finally spoke. "Eva Dalton, you have not yet taken your final vows. I have suspected for some time that your heart carries you toward a different path than the contemplative life, though I have said nothing, waiting for you to find your own clarity. I will not order you to remain within these walls if your calling lies elsewhere, but I ask you both to consider carefully what you propose. This is not a decision to be made in fear and haste." "I have thought of little else these past weeks, Mother," Eva said quietly. "I love this place, and I love the peace it offered me when I most needed it. But I do not believe my calling was ever truly to remain cloistered forever. I believe it was to learn patience, and healing, and faith, so that I might carry those gifts into whatever comes next. I believe what comes next may well be standing beside this man, protecting what deserves protecting, using the skills my father gave me for the purpose he always intended them." Luke stared at her, stunned into silence by the calm certainty of her declaration, made not in a moment of romantic impulse, but with the same careful, deliberate consideration she brought to every decision he had watched her make in the months since his arrival. "You would risk everything," he said finally, "your whole future, your safety, for a man who brought nothing to your doorstep but danger and a bullet wound." "You brought more than danger, Luke Bailey," Eva said, stepping closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes, close enough that the space between them seemed to hum with unspoken possibility. You brought a man who chose conscience over survival, who refused to burn a family out of their home even knowing it would cost him everything. That is not nothing. That is exactly the kind of man worth risking something for. Mother Agnes cleared her throat pointedly, though there was warmth in her expression rather than disapproval. If you both intend to stay and face this threat, then we had best plan for it properly, rather than standing about declaring feelings in my courtyard while outlaws draw nearer by the hour. Eva, gather every weapon this convent possesses. Mr. Bailey, I believe it is time you told us everything you know about Silas Crane's methods, his men, and his weaknesses, so that we might prepare a defense worthy of the threat. It was in the days that followed, as Luke and Eva worked together to fortify the convent and prepare its unlikely defenders, that Luke came to understand the full depth of what he had found in this remarkable woman, and Eva came to understand that the man she had nursed back to health was capable of a courage and tenderness that matched, and perhaps exceeded, her own. They spent hours mapping the approaches to the convent, identifying the best defensive positions, the blind spots an attacker might exploit, the routes Crane's men would most likely take given the terrain. Luke's years riding with outlaws gave him invaluable insight into how such men thought, how they planned their raids, what tactics they favored. Crane likes to intimidate first, Luke explained, sketching rough diagrams in the dirt with a stick while Eva listened with fierce concentration. He will ride in loud, make demands, try to frighten everyone into compliance before he ever fires a shot. He believes fear is the most efficient weapon, and often he is right, because most folks have never faced down an armed man before and simply freeze. I will not freeze, Eva said simply. No, Luke agreed, looking at her with something that had grown over the past days into open admiration. I do not believe you will. They trained the other sisters as best they could in the time available, teaching the younger women how to load rifles, how to find cover, how to remain calm under the threat of violence, though Mother Agnes made clear that only Eva, Luke, and two of the older sisters who had grown up on ranches before taking their vows would actually be expected to fire weapons in the event of an attack. In the quiet moments between preparations, Luke found himself increasingly unable to hide the depth of his feelings for Eva Dalton. He watched her teach a younger sister how to properly brace a rifle against recoil, watched her calm the frightened postulants with steady words and steadier hands, watched her move through the convent grounds assessing defensive positions, with a tactical mind sharper than any he had encountered among grown men who called themselves professional gunfighters. You keep looking at me like you have never seen a woman before, Eva observed one evening, catching him staring as she cleaned her father's old service revolver, a weapon she had kept hidden among her few possessions since arriving at the convent. I have never seen a woman like you, Luke admitted, no longer bothering to hide it. I have known plenty of women in my life, Eva. Some kind, some cruel, some clever, some foolish. But I have never known anyone, man or woman, who combines the gentleness I watched you show me when I was half dead with fever, and the absolute steel I have watched you show these past days preparing to face down Silas Crane's gang. I did not think such a combination was possible in a single person. Eva set down the revolver and met his eyes directly, without coyness or false modesty. My father used to say that gentleness without strength is simply weakness wearing a kind face, and strength without gentleness is simply cruelty wearing a brave face. He wanted me to have both because he believed the world needed more people capable of both, not fewer. He sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was. I only wish he had lived long enough to see what I might become with the lessons he gave me. Her voice caught slightly on the words, the only crack Luke had seen in her composure since he had known her, and he found himself reaching for her hand before he had consciously decided to do so. He would be proud, Luke said quietly. I have known you only a handful of months, Eva, and even I can see clearly what he must have seen in you from the very beginning. You are the bravest, most capable person I have ever met, and I do not say that lightly, having ridden alongside men who called themselves the fastest guns in the territory. Eva did not pull her hand away. Instead, she turned it in his grip, lacing her fingers through his, and the simple contact sent a current of warmth through Luke's chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat and everything to do with the woman standing before him. "Whatever happens when Crane arrives," Eva said softly, "I want you to know that I do not regret a single moment of these past months, nursing you back to health, learning your secrets, sharing my own. Whatever this is between us, Luke Bailey, I have chosen it with clear eyes and a clear conscience, and I would choose it again." "Eva," Luke said, her name feeling suddenly precious in his mouth, "if we survive what is coming, I intend to ask you a question I have never in my life imagined asking anyone." "Then I suggest," Eva said, a faint smile touching her lips despite the gravity of their circumstances, "that we make very certain we survive." The final confrontation came 4 days later, on a morning that began with deceptive calm, the desert sky a clear, cloudless blue, the air still cool with the last traces of dawn. Eva had risen before sunrise, as had become her habit, to check the perimeter and confirm the defensive positions they had established over the preceding days. It was she who first spotted the dust cloud rising along the ridge road. 6 riders moving at a steady, deliberate pace that spoke of men confident in their numbers and their purpose. "They are here," she called out, the warning carrying across the courtyard with the same clarity and calm that had marked every decision she had made since Luke's arrival at the convent gates. "Positions, everyone. Remember what we discussed." What followed was the scene that had opened this story. The confrontation in the courtyard, Silas Crane's demand for Luke Bailey's surrender, and Eva Dalton's stunning intervention, her single shot disarming Crane before he could fire on the man who had, without either of them fully realizing it until that very moment, become the center of both their lives. But the story did not end with that first retreat. Crane, humiliated and furious, regrouped his remaining men a half-mile from the convent, and by midday, he had returned with reinforcements, 8 more riders recruited from a nearby mining camp with promises of easy money, bringing his total force to 14 armed men against a convent defended by 2 trained shooters, and a handful of sisters with more courage than combat experience. "He means to overwhelm us with numbers," Luke said grimly, watching the approaching force from behind the convent's low adobe wall. Eva crouched beside him with her father's Winchester at the ready. 14 against us. Even with the sisters helping load and pass ammunition, we cannot hold against a force that size in open combat." "Then we do not fight them in the open," Eva said, her mind already working through the tactical problem with the same clarity she brought to everything. "We use the terrain, the buildings, the walls. We make them come to us through narrow approaches where their numbers matter less." Your knowledge of how Crane thinks combined with my father's teachings about defensive positions, we can even these odds considerably. They worked quickly, repositioning the sisters to create overlapping fields of fire from the chapel bell tower and the infirmary's second-story window, forcing any approach toward the main courtyard through a narrow gap between the well house and the garden wall that Luke and Eva could defend directly. When Crane's expanded force arrived, they found not the easy target they expected but a position bristling with unexpected resistance. Eva's shot from the bell tower took down the horse of the lead rider before he could clear the gap, sending him tumbling into the dust, and the ambush she and Luke had prepared behind the well house cut off the second wave of riders before they could regroup. Still, the numbers eventually told, and Crane's remaining men pressed forward with the ruthless determination of hired guns who had already been paid and had no intention of returning empty-handed. Luke found himself in close combat with 2 of the outlaws simultaneously, his old skills returning with brutal efficiency, even as he fought to avoid killing where he could, wounding rather than ending lives, a mercy his opponents did not return. It was in the chaos of that final assault, with Luke pinned behind an overturned wagon and taking fire from two directions, that Eva Dalton performed the act that would forever cement, in his mind and heart, the true measure of the woman he had come to love. She saw Crane himself, having circled wide during the confusion, drawing a bead on Luke's exposed position from nearly 200 yards away, a shot that would have required extraordinary skill even from a professional marksman under calm conditions, let alone in the chaos of an active gunfight. Eva did not hesitate. She dropped to one knee on the bell tower platform, steadied her breathing exactly as her father had taught her years before, and fired a single shot across the entire width of the convent grounds that struck Crane's rifle barrel with such precision that the weapon discharged harmlessly into the dirt, the impact knocking the gun from his hands and very likely saving Luke's life in the same instant. Luke, hearing the shot and turning to see Crane's rifle spinning away, understood immediately what had happened, understood that Eva had made a shot that few gunfighters in the entire territory could have managed, a shot delivered not in the calm of practice but in the screaming chaos of real combat, with lives hanging in the balance. The sight of it, more than anything else in their months together, more than her tender care of his wounds or her calm certainty in the face of Crane's threats, struck Luke with the full, overwhelming force of realization. He had spent his entire adult life believing himself to be among the most capable gunfighters in the territory, and here was a woman, a novice nun who had never fired a shot in true combat until that very morning, demonstrating skill that surpassed anything he had witnessed in years of riding with hardened outlaws. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader disarmed and several of their number wounded or fled, broke and scattered, abandoning the assault entirely. Crane himself, cornered by Luke moments later as he scrambled for his fallen weapon, found himself staring down the barrel of his own former partner's revolver, retrieved from the cabinet where it had sat untouched for months. "You could have killed me clean from that tower," Crane said, staring past Luke toward the bell tower where Eva still stood, her rifle lowered now but her posture unmistakably alert. "That nun, who in the hell is she?" "She is the woman who is about to save your worthless life," Luke said, "because unlike you, we do not intend to become murderers today, even of men who deserve it. You are going to ride to Redemption Creek, and you are going to tell the sheriff everything, about the Whitfield family, about what you ordered me to do, about every dirty job you have run through this territory for the past 6 years. You are going to do this because if you do not, I will make certain every lawman between here and the Mexican border learns your name and your crimes, and there will be no corner of this territory left for you to hide in." Crane, defeated and humiliated, his gang scattered, his reputation as a dangerous outlaw shattered by a nun's rifle shot that would be spoken of in Redemption Creek for years to come, had little choice but to comply. Within a week, his confession, combined with testimony from the Whitfield family, who returned to the territory once word reached them that Crane's power had been broken, cleared Luke Bailey's name entirely, transforming him in the eyes of Redemption Creek from a hunted gunslinger into the man who had risked everything to save an innocent family from ruin. The town, once wary of the stranger who had brought outlaws to their doorstep, began instead to speak of Luke Bailey with something approaching reverence, and of Eva Dalton with outright astonishment, the story of the sharpshooting novice spreading from the saloon to the general store to every ranch within riding distance, growing more legendary with each retelling, until people spoke of her shot across the convent grounds as though she had split a bullet in midair. In the weeks following Crane's defeat, as the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Luke and Eva found themselves facing a different kind of reckoning, the quiet, private reckoning of two hearts that had discovered, through fire and danger, exactly what they meant to each other, Mother Agnes called them both to her small office one afternoon, the late autumn light slanting golden through the single window, and studied them both with the shrewd, patient eyes of a woman who had spent decades understanding the human heart. "Eva Dalton," she said, "you have not taken your final vows, and I do not believe, watching you these past months, that you ever truly intended to. I believe God brought you to this convent not to keep you cloistered forever, but to heal you after your father's death, to prepare you for whatever came next. I believe what came next arrived on our doorstep 4 months ago, half dead and bleeding, and I believe your paths were always meant to cross. Mother, I do not wish to abandon everything you and the sisters have given me," Eva said, though her eyes had already found Luke's across the small room. "You are not abandoning anything, child. You are simply walking forward into the fullness of your calling, wherever that leads. I release you from your novitiate with my full blessing, and I suspect," Mother Agnes added, a rare smile crossing her weathered face, "that a certain former gunslinger has something he wishes to ask you, if he can find the courage to do so in front of an old nun." Luke felt his face flush, but he did not hesitate. He had faced down outlaws and bullets, had survived a bullet wound and a manhunt, but nothing in his life had ever felt as terrifying and as certain as the moment he knelt before Eva Dalton in Mother Agnes's small office, the autumn light falling across her face, and asked the question he had been carrying in his heart since the moment he watched her disarm Sela's crane in the convent courtyard. "Eva Dalton," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart, "you saved my life more times than I can count these past months, first with your medicine, then with your courage, and finally with a rifle shot that I will remember until the day I die. You are the strongest, most capable, most remarkable person I have ever known, and I do not deserve you, but I am asking anyway, because I cannot imagine building the future I want without you standing beside me as my equal in every sense. Will you marry me?" Eva, who had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, who had nursed a dying stranger back to health with steady hands, who had made a shot across 200 yards of chaos that would be spoken of in Redemption Creek for generations, felt tears rise in her eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember, and did not try to stop them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Luke Bailey, I will marry you on one condition. Anything. That you never again mistake gentleness for weakness, in me or in any woman you meet, for the rest of your life." "I promise you," Luke said, rising to take her hands in his, "I will spend every day of my life grateful that I learned that lesson from the finest teacher the territory could have provided." They were married 3 weeks later in the convent's small chapel, with Mother Agnes presiding over the ceremony herself, a rare privilege she granted only because, as she put it, she had never in her years of service witnessed a love story quite so thoroughly earned through fire and courage and honest confession. The town of Redemption Creek turned out in numbers that surprised even Mother Agnes, filling the small chapel and spilling out into the courtyard, where the confrontation with Crane had taken place months before. The Whitfield family attended. The children Luke had refused to harm now grown healthier and safer, thanks to the sacrifice he had made on their behalf. And the mother of the family wept openly through the ceremony, understanding better than most exactly what Luke's choice that terrible day had cost him, and exactly what it had ultimately won him in return. Sheriff Coleman, who had overseen Crane's arrest and the dismantling of his remaining gang, presented Luke with a formal pardon from the territorial governor, clearing his name entirely of any crimes committed during his years with Crane's outfit, in recognition of his role in exposing Crane's larger criminal enterprise and protecting innocent settlers throughout the region. "Never thought I would live to see the day a gunslinger got saved by a nun with better aim than half my deputies," Sheriff Coleman remarked to Luke after the ceremony, shaking his hand with genuine warmth. "You are a lucky man, Bailey. Do not ever forget it." "I do not intend to, Sheriff," Luke replied, watching Eva across the courtyard as she laughed with two of the younger sisters, her face alight with a joy he had never seen before their ordeal, a joy that seemed to grow brighter with each passing day now that the shadow of Crane's threat had finally lifted. Not for a single day of the rest of my life. They settled on a parcel of land 8 miles from Redemption Creek, purchased with the reward money the territorial government provided for information leading to the dismantling of Crane's criminal network. Land with good water from a year-round spring, and grass sufficient for the small herd of horses Luke had always dreamed of raising. Eva, true to the vision she had shared with Luke that evening in the orchard so many months before, did not simply retire into domestic quietude once they were married. She continued to hunt for their table, her skill with a rifle providing fresh meat throughout every season, and word of her marksmanship spread far enough that ranchers from throughout the territory began seeking her out for lessons, paying good money to have their sons and daughters trained by the woman who had once outshot a professional gunfighter to save a convent full of nuns. Luke, for his part, found in ranch work a peace he had never imagined possible during his years riding with Crane's outfit. He built a solid home with his own hands, a home with real glass windows and a wide front porch where he and Eva took to sitting each evening as the sun set over the desert hills, watching the horses graze in the fading light, their hands intertwined, their shared silence comfortable in the way that only comes from two people who have weathered genuine danger together and emerged not diminished but strengthened by the ordeal. Within 2 years, their family began to grow. Their first child, a son they named Frank after Eva's father, arrived on a windy spring morning, and Luke wept openly holding his newborn son for the first time, overwhelmed by a tenderness he had never imagined himself capable of feeling, having spent so many years believing his hands were suited only for violence. "He has your eyes," Eva said softly, exhausted but radiant, watching Luke cradle their son with a gentleness that would have astonished the outlaws who once rode alongside him. "He has your father's namesake," Luke replied, "and I hope to God he has your courage and your steady hands should he ever need them." Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, followed 2 years later, and Eva insisted, over Luke's initial protests born of protective instinct, on teaching both children to shoot as soon as they were old enough to hold a rifle properly, just as her own father had taught her. "They will grow up in a territory that is still wild, still dangerous in places," Eva told Luke, when he expressed concern about their young daughter learning to handle firearms. "I would rather my children grow up capable of protecting themselves and others than grow up helpless and hoping someone else will always be there to save them. That lesson served me well, Luke. It saved your life, and it saved this family we have built together. I will not deny that same gift to our own children, son or daughter alike." Luke, remembering the moment in the convent courtyard when Eva's steady aim had saved not just his life, but the lives of every sister within those walls, found he could not argue with her logic. And in time, he came to take genuine pride in watching both his son and his daughter develop the same careful, disciplined skill with a rifle that had first drawn him to their mother in that quiet orchard so many years before. Mother Agnes visited often in the years that followed, watching with evident satisfaction as the family Luke and Eva built together flourished, the convent and the ranch maintaining close ties, with Eva returning regularly to help train the younger sisters in basic self-defense, a practice Mother Agnes had quietly instituted after witnessing firsthand the value of Eva's skills during Crane's assault. "I told you," Mother Agnes said to Eva once, watching young Frank practice his aim on tin cans in the orchard behind the ranch house, his father standing patiently beside him, offering gentle correction, "that God's calling reveals itself in its own time." I do not believe I have ever seen a calling reveal itself quite so dramatically or quite so happily as yours did, child. "I owe it all to you, Mother," Eva said, embracing the older woman warmly. "You gave me shelter when I needed it most, and the wisdom to recognize when it was time to walk forward into something new. Silas Crane, stripped of his gang and his reputation, served 8 years in the territorial prison for his crimes before dying of consumption behind bars. A fate that brought Luke and Eva no particular satisfaction, but did bring a final, quiet closure to the darkest chapter of Luke's past. A chapter that no longer had any power to threaten the peaceful life they had built together. The Whitfield family, whom Luke had risked everything to protect, remained close neighbors and dear friends, their eldest son eventually courting and marrying one of the younger sisters who had left the convent following Eva's example. Discerning her own calling led toward marriage and family rather than permanent religious life. A decision Mother Agnes blessed with the same generous wisdom she had shown Eva years before. By the time their third child arrived, a second son they named William, Luke Bailey had become one of the most respected men in Redemption Creek, not for his skill with a gun, though that skill remained undiminished and occasionally useful when trouble passed through the territory, but for his integrity, his hard work, and his obvious, unashamed devotion to his remarkable wife. "Folks still talk about that shot you made, you know," Luke said to Eva one evening, many years after Crane's defeat, as they sat together on their porch watching their 3 children chase fireflies in the deepening dusk. "The one across the convent grounds. I have heard it told so many different ways in town. Sometimes you are shooting from horseback. Sometimes you are shooting through a burning building. The story grows more impossible every year." "Let them tell it however they like," Eva said, leaning her head against his shoulder, the comfortable weight of years together settled between them like a well-worn blanket. "The truth is impossible enough for me. A gunslinger hiding in a convent and a novice nun who exposed him not to destroy him, but to save him, and in doing so, found the truest calling of her own life. I have never regretted a single moment of it," Luke said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Not the bullet wound, not the fear, not even facing down Crane's gang against impossible odds. Every moment of danger led me to you, Eva Dalton Bailey, and I would walk through it all again 100 times over for the privilege of building this life with you." "As would I," Eva said softly, watching their children's laughter echo across the darkening yard, the horses settling for the night in the corral Luke had built with his own 2 hands, the home they had created together standing solid and warm against the vast Arizona sky. Every single time. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and approaching rain, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the gathering dark. But within the walls of the home Luke Bailey and Eva Dalton had built together, there was only peace, only love, only the quiet certainty of 2 people who had faced down the darkest threats the territory could offer and emerged not merely as survivors, but as the truest protectors of everything they held dear, together, always, exactly as they were always meant to be.